I never thought the night would unfold like this. Not after the funeral. Not after the tears had dried and the sympathy cards had stopped coming. I was alone, drowning in the deafening silence of my house, staring at the remnants of a life I no longer recognized. Thad was gone, and with him, any semblance of purpose. I had no idea how to fill the empty space he left behind. No idea how to start rebuilding a life that had been shattered in an instant. Then there was a knock at the door. At first, I thought it was just the wind or my mind playing tricks on me. But when I opened it, there he was, Maris, my son's best friend, standing there like a ghost from the past. His eyes were filled with something deeper than sympathy, something that made my heart race and my pulse quicken. His voice was kind, but there was a rawness to it that cut through me, leaving me exposed. "I brought you something," he said, his tone low, his gaze not quite meeting mine. A small plastic container in his hand, a casserole. A simple gesture, yet it hit me harder than I expected. "Thank you," I whispered, stepping aside to let him in. What started as an innocent visit quickly spiraled into something neither of us could control. The grief that had bound me for so long gave way to a new kind of hunger, a hunger for connection, for warmth, for something real. And when he touched me, when his hand brushed mine, I couldn't help but feel the pull. It was as if everything inside me, all the loneliness and the need for comfort, snapped into focus. And then, before I knew it, I was in his arms, kissing him as if I'd been starving for this very moment. It had been a week since Thad's funeral, and I was still trying to find my way through the fog of grief. The house felt different without him. The rooms, once filled with laughter and the scent of his cologne, now seemed too big, too quiet. I spent most of my days sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the half-finished coffee in front of me, too exhausted to do anything more than breathe. Thad had been the love of my life, but our marriage had always been complicated. There were good times, yes, but there were also long stretches of silence, of emotional distance that I had convinced myself was normal. After all, we had been married for over 20 years. The intimacy, the passion, had slowly faded into routine. And now, with him gone, I found myself questioning everything. I hadn't expected Maris to come by. He had been my son's best friend for years, always hanging around the house, always in the background. He had gone off to college, and I hadn't seen him since. But that evening, when I heard that knock on the door, I didn't hesitate to open it. And there he was, standing on my doorstep, looking so different than I remembered. Maris had grown up. He was no longer the gangly teenager who had spent nights on the couch playing video games with my son. Now, he was tall, broad-shouldered, with a quiet confidence that made my breath catch. His hair was shorter, and his eyes had this intensity to them, as if he'd seen the world and carried its weight. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, his voice deep, sincere. His words were kind, but there was something more in his gaze, something I couldn't quite place. "Thank you," I replied, my voice breaking just slightly. I stepped aside to let him in, unsure of why I felt this strange flutter in my chest. He walked in like he belonged there, setting the casserole on the counter without a word. I watched him for a moment, feeling a strange pull between us, something unspoken. His presence filled the room, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel so alone. "How are you holding up?" Maris asked, turning to face me. His gaze was steady, unwavering, like he truly wanted to know. "Surviving," I said with a faint smile, but the word felt like glass shattering in my throat. He didn't press me for more, but I could see the concern in his eyes. We stood there for a moment in silence, the weight of the past few days hanging between us. I wanted to retreat, to bury myself in my grief, but something stopped me. Instead, I just stood there, feeling something shift inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. "You don't have to stay," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm fine." But Maris didn't leave. He stood there, looking at me, waiting for me to say the words. And then, almost as if he knew exactly what I needed, he spoke again. "Would you like me to stay for a while?" His voice was softer now, almost shy, as though he was unsure if he was overstepping some invisible line. But there was a sincerity in his tone that made my heart skip. I hesitated. The silence in the house was unbearable. I needed something, anything, to fill the void. I needed warmth. I needed connection. Yes, I said too quickly. Please. We moved to the living room, where the soft light of the lamp cast long shadows on the walls. Maris sat on the edge of the couch, his posture still uncertain, while I curled up on the opposite end, pulling a blanket over my lap. We sat in silence, the only sounds being the occasional creak of the old house and the hum of the refrigerator in the background. I tried to focus on the small talk, on how much had changed since he left for college, on his new job, on anything that didn't hurt. But the tension between us, the closeness that lingered in the air, made it impossible to ignore. As the minutes ticked by, my mind started to drift. I couldn't stop thinking about how he looked at me, how his presence made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't long before Maris asked me about Thad, what I missed most about him. The question, simple as it was, struck a chord deep within me. I hadn't allowed myself to think about those things, the little moments, the quiet nights together, the way he would hold me when I was upset. But as I spoke, the words poured out of me, and I realized just how much I had been holding back. Maris didn't interrupt. He didn't try to comfort me. He just listened, really listened, in a way that made me feel seen, like I wasn't just a grieving widow, but a woman who still had something to offer. His attention was steady, unwavering, and as the conversation deepened, so did the connection between us. It was then that I felt it, a shift, a change. The rawness of the moment made my heart race, and suddenly, I wasn't just mourning the loss of my husband anymore. I was aching for something else, something I couldn't name, something I hadn't allowed myself to crave. And in that silence, that weighty, loaded silence, Maris reached out. He didn't speak, didn't ask permission, but his hand brushed mine, a soft, tentative touch that made my breath catch. I looked at him, my heart pounding in my chest, and before I could think, before I could second-guess myself, I leaned in, and for the first time in a long time, I kissed him. It was soft at first, gentle, but the moment I tasted him, I knew this was no mistake. The kiss deepened, urgent, filled with longing. And when he pulled me closer, when I felt the warmth of his body against mine, I couldn't stop. For the first time in days, I felt alive. Days passed in a blur. Maris began to visit more often, sometimes bringing food, other times just stopping by to check on me. I told myself it was nothing more than a kind gesture, a son's best friend looking out for his grieving mother. But as the visits continued, I couldn't ignore the change in the air between us. What started as a simple act of compassion quickly escalated into something far more dangerous. Every time he came, there was a spark, a shift that hung in the air like static electricity. At first, I chalked it up to my grief, the overwhelming loneliness that seemed to swallow me whole. But as the days wore on, I couldn't deny it any longer. There was a tension between us, an undeniable connection that neither of us could ignore. And despite the guilt that gnawed at me, I wanted him. He would sit across from me at the kitchen table, his eyes warm but never lingering too long. I watched the way his hands moved as he spoke, the quiet strength in his voice, the way he listened to me, really listened, in a way Thad never did toward the end. With Maris, I felt heard, seen. I began to crave that attention more than I cared to admit. One evening, he stayed later than usual. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that felt suffocating. It wasn't late, but it was the kind of night that draped itself over you, making time feel like it had stretched beyond reason. The dim light in the living room cast shadows on the walls, and I could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, a small, constant reminder that the world outside was still turning, even if my world felt like it had stopped. I sat on the couch, legs pulled up beneath me, wrapped in a throw blanket. Maris had taken a seat beside me, closer than usual, our legs almost touching. I could feel his presence, that heat that seemed to radiate off of him. And yet, I didn't move away. I didn't want to. I wanted to stay in this fragile moment, in this space where I didn't feel so alone. We talked. The conversation began innocently enough about the weather, about how much the neighborhood had changed, about my son, who hadn't visited in a while. But the longer we spoke, the more I realized that the space between us was shrinking, and I wasn't doing anything to stop it. My heart beat faster, my thoughts scattered. I found myself watching his lips, wondering what it would feel like to kiss him again. And then it happened. His voice softened, and for the first time that night, there was no talking, no distractions. He was looking at me, his gaze intense, as though he could see right through me. And before I could think about the consequences, before I could tell myself to stop, he leaned in. His lips brushed against mine, gentle at first, like a question. I froze for a moment, stunned. But when I felt his hand on my arm, grounding me, I couldn't pull away. His kiss deepened, more insistent now, and I let him in. The floodgates opened the moment our mouths met, and I was no longer just grieving the loss of my husband. I was grasping at something else, something I had long denied myself. I kissed him back, desperate for this feeling I hadn't experienced in years. His touch was soft but certain, like he knew exactly what he was doing, like he knew exactly how to make me forget everything else. I could feel the weight of my betrayal, but it was nothing compared to the desire that pulsed through my body, the heat that built between us like a storm waiting to break. I thought about pulling away, about stopping it all before things got out of hand, but the thought was fleeting. I was too far gone. The grief, the loneliness, the ache of living without Thad, none of it mattered anymore. Maris shifted, moving closer, and before I could gather my thoughts, his hands were on me. He undid the blanket around me, pulling it off and tossing it aside. I didn't protest. I couldn't. His lips never left mine, and his hands roamed, touching and exploring. I felt exposed in a way I hadn't in years, but it wasn't just physical, it was emotional. I was vulnerable in every sense of the word. His hands slid under my shirt, the coolness of his touch making me gasp. I tensed, unsure, but then his lips traveled down my neck, and all thought left me. The last vestiges of guilt melted away with every kiss, every touch, until all I could think about was him. I told myself this was a mistake, that this couldn't happen, but my body refused to listen. When he removed my clothes, exposing me to the night air and to him, I felt raw, stripped bare in every sense. His touch was gentle but purposeful, and I couldn't help but respond. I had wanted this for so long, not just the physical touch, but the connection, the need for someone to fill the emptiness inside me. He brought out his tool and spread my legs. I thought a phrase that echoed in my mind, but I didn't care. It was happening. I was letting it happen. The lines between comfort and lust had been crossed, and there was no going back. My body, despite the betrayal, craved this, craved him. Maris was careful, deliberate, as he moved over me. There was no rushing, no urgency in his movements. It was as though he understood the depth of my loneliness, the desperation I hadn't voiced aloud. Each touch, each kiss, each breath we shared was a form of healing, or maybe it was just a temporary escape from the pain. I wasn't sure anymore. I should have stopped. I should have pulled away and locked the door, telling myself it was wrong. But I couldn't. I didn't want to. The grief, the guilt, they all vanished in the haze of our connection. I gave in to him, to the need for comfort, for intimacy, for someone to make me feel alive again. It was reckless. It was wrong. But it was also real. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the living room as I lay there, tangled in the sheets, alone with the mess I had made. I hadn't meant for it to happen. No, that's a lie. I had wanted it, craved it. But now that it was over, I felt like something inside me had broken. The shame was almost suffocating, a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. I hadn't even realized I had fallen asleep until I woke up, blinking against the unfamiliar light and the strange, still silence in the room. I looked around, disoriented, until my gaze fell on the empty spot beside me. The sheets were warm where Maris had been, but he was gone. I sat up slowly, my body sore, my mind spinning with guilt. I reached for the blanket, clutching it to my chest, as if it could shield me from the truth. What had I done? I had betrayed Thad, even in death. I had let Maris in, and now, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line from which there was no return. I had pushed my grief down so far, buried it so deep, that this affair felt like the only way to feel anything again. But was it worth it? Was any of this worth the pain I was already feeling? The soft click of the door opening startled me, and I turned to see Maris standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He wasn't wearing the same intensity from the night before, but there was something in his eyes that stopped me from speaking. His gaze, steady and calm, seemed to cut through my guilt and right into me. "Morning," he said softly, his voice still low from sleep. He moved toward me, sitting at the edge of the bed, his fingers brushing lightly against my arm. I flinched at the touch, my heart racing. He didn't apologize, didn't seem ashamed of what had happened. In fact, it almost seemed like he was waiting for me to say something, to acknowledge what we had done. But I couldn't find the words. I wanted to say it was a mistake, that we shouldn't have done this. But instead, I just sat there, holding the blanket tighter around me. Maris, in his quiet way, didn't push. He just sat with me, close enough that I could feel his warmth, but not close enough to make it harder to breathe. "I don't regret it," he said eventually, his words slow and measured, like he was carefully choosing each one. "And I don't think you do either." His words rattled me. I couldn't deny that there was a part of me that didn't regret it, but the shame was so much heavier, so much more real, that I couldn't look him in the eye. "I should go," Maris said after a long silence, standing up from the bed. His hand brushed the back of my head, and for a brief moment, it felt almost comforting. "But I'll be back," he added, as if the affair we had just started was somehow inevitable. I wanted to stop him, to tell him this couldn't continue, but I didn't. I let him leave, watching him walk out the door and into the world that would continue on, as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. And not just between us, but within me. As the days passed, Morris continued to visit, each time more frequent than the last. Every time I saw him, I felt the pull of something darker, something I couldn't control. I tried to distance myself, to tell myself this wasn't real, but the truth was, it felt more real than anything I had experienced in years. I couldn't stop thinking about him. His touch, his kiss, the way he made me feel. It was like a drug, and I was addicted. I had been starving for attention, for touch, for warmth, and Maris had given it to me. But the more we gave into it, the more I knew we were treading on dangerous ground. The guilt weighed heavier with each passing day. Every time he left, I felt like I was drowning in it. Thad's face haunted me, and I couldn't escape the image of what I had done. I had promised myself I would never betray him, but I had. And I was still doing it. But Maris wouldn't let me go. Every visit, every touch, was another step deeper into the web we were weaving. He was persistent, and I, too weak to stop him, allowed it. We were both stuck in a cycle that neither of us knew how to break. I told myself I would end it soon, that I couldn't keep living like this. But with each stolen kiss, each moment we shared, it became harder and harder to walk away. What started as a mistake had turned into something much more complicated. Maris wasn't just my son's best friend anymore. He was my lover, and the lines between mother and son's friend had blurred beyond recognition. What had once been a safe, comfortable relationship had been twisted into something else, something dangerous. I found myself constantly torn between the desire to stop it and the need to feel something other than the emptiness I had been living with for so long. Every time I saw Maris, my heart would race, my body would ache for him. But at the same time, I knew it was wrong. The guilt, the shame, it all weighed on me like a suffocating cloud. And then there was the moment I couldn't ignore anymore, the moment when Maris didn't just kiss me but told me he loved me. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I pulled away, not out of anger, but out of confusion. How could he love me? He was young. He was my son's friend. He had no idea what love was. Not really. And yet, There it was, hanging between us like an unspoken truth. "Don't say that," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You don't mean that." But Maris just looked at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't place. Something deeper than desire. "I do mean it," he said softly, as if he was trying to convince himself more than me. It was only when I received the letter that everything started to unravel. Thad's will had been read, and there were secrets hidden within it that I never expected. It wasn't just about money or property. There were clauses I had never known about, decisions Thad had made, that shocked me to my core. The will revealed that there had been things going on in our marriage that I never knew about. Things that made me question everything: my marriage, my husband, and the affair I was having now. As the truth came to light, I began to see Maris in a different light. He wasn't just the boy who had comforted me during my grief. No, he had his own secrets. Secrets that tied him to my husband's past in ways I couldn't yet understand. The relationship between us had never just been about comfort. There was something more, something dark and hidden. And as the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place, I realized that Maris had been playing a much bigger game than I had ever realized. I am left standing at the edge of a precipice, unsure of how to move forward. What would I do now? Would I continue down this dangerous path with Maris? Or would I finally face the truth and the consequences of my actions? The weight of it all pressed down on me, and I couldn't see a way out. What I did know was this: nothing would ever be the same again. And as I stared into the future, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come.